Chapter 6. The Wordless Prayer. Kirill had vanished. But Mrs. Nurse came every hour. She even grew less frigid in her dealings with Georgi, the patient enlisted by Prigozhin himself. The food, now carefully prepared by the detention center's cook, seemed to have regained flavors worthy of the name. As September approached, a physical therapist was assigned to take over the initial treatments. Regularly changed dressings, some antibiotics and healing ointments accelerated the regeneration of the burned skin on Georgi's thigh. For his dislocated knees and wrists, a careful reduction had snapped them back into place, braced with splints to support the joints as they healed. Physiotherapy sessions had begun as soon as the pain had sufficiently receded, initially focusing on recovering mobility without excessive strain, then gradually evolving toward muscle-strengthening exercises. The mattress on which Georgi rested, along with the sheets, had been replaced with fresh, clean bedding. A small luxury that strangely reminded him of home. A place he had not seen in what seems like ages. A place he would never see again. This attention to detail, this sudden upgrade in living conditions, contrasted sharply with his recent past, offering him a semblance of comfort and normalcy in a setting so desperately far from his former everyday life. The calm before the storm, without a shadow of a doubt. These treatments, administered within the austere walls of a prison transformed into a convalescent ward, served to transition him from pain to healing, from despair to a renewed force of will. Wagner, in a way, had saved Georgi. The debt owed to them was becoming less abstract, as Georgi's body gradually recovered, gained in power. Wagner was no longer just a name in the media. It was now a burden, a shadow ready to claim its due at any moment. Georgi felt that this debt wasn't merely a matter of loyalty or a returned favor. It was an invisible chain binding him to a much larger machine, to a force from which he could no longer tear himself away. He was recovering, getting better and better, and the healing of his body, paradoxically, chained him ever tighter to this debt, to this web of power and influence that now controlled his destiny. The prison administration informed Georgi that his transfer was scheduled for the 11th of October. To streamline the administrative process and avoid a mountain of paperwork, 3 consecutive visits were organized for the day prior, the 10th of October. The first visit was from his mother. As she entered, a mixture of pain and love gleamed in her eyes.
Gosha, my child, you have lost so much weight.
Georgi stared at the floor, fleeing all eye contact.
But you won't tell me anything, as it always was.
She tried to mask her distress behind a forced smile.
I brought you some homemade strawberry jam that you like, to remind you of home.
Carefully, she placed a small jar wrapped in cloth on the table. The memories his mother's presence evoked seemed to belong to another life. He had to repress this profound melancholy, and the waves of tears it brought onto him.
Every day, I pray for you. No matter where you go, never forget where you come from, and keep within you the hope of a return, my son. Please.
Her trembling hands tightly gripped her son's. He did not answer. The words had lost their meaning.
You remind me a lot of your father, just as stubborn, just as driven by his ideas, which eventually killed him. Promise me you won't be on the wrong side of history. Promise me you'll come back.
But only silence answered her. No parent should have to endure such an ordeal, Georgi thought. He felt a deep, piercing shame for having ended up here, for forcing his family to visit him between these walls and iron bars, for making his mother the witness to his own downfall. He would have preferred to simply vanish. Thus, sitting side by side, they watched 10 minutes of visiting time slip away. With a final look filled with heartbreaking affection, his mother stepped away.
By the way, Anya says hello.
For the second visit, Georgi was reunited with Sergei. Although his face seemed hollow, a faint smile nonetheless floated upon it. About 2 months had passed since their last meeting, but in troubled times, time transforms. It becomes viscous, like mud, flowing with painful sluggishness. They embraced, two old comrades whom time and circumstance had separated for what felt like an eternity, reunited for a fleeting moment by an unalterable bond of friendship, by that invaluable human warmth. Sergei had just passed his high school exams and had been accepted into Moscow State University, in the faculty he had so desired. His military service would therefore be postponed for the duration of his higher education. With any luck, by then, the war would be over. Igor, too, had managed to get into the same institution. Fate, decidedly, had a capricious sense of humor. Sergei then brought up Alexander. He had learned what the Beguiling Serpents were, their mission, and their methods. Consequently, he had decided to join Misha to become his assistant. Rumor had it he had also acquired a parrot that swore in Ingush, the endangered language spoken in the Vladikavkaz region. Finally, Sergei mentioned Novosard. Following Georgi's arrest, Novosard had begun to view his studies as a futile endeavor. He had left for Georgia, heading to Tbilisi behind the wheel of his Lada 2104. There, he had contacted the Ukrainian embassy to be transferred as a volunteer to Kiev, where he had joined the Freedom of Russia Legion. This legion was composed of Russian and Chechen nationals, volunteers and deserters, trained by the Ukrainian armed forces, forming an elite anti-Putin unit. Their military status was peculiar. Since the Ukrainian army could not officially recruit soldiers of an enemy nationality, the Russian legionnaires had to informally renounce their passports, thereby becoming stateless fighters, incapable of returning home without securing a decisive victory. Georgi suddenly felt like a vampire wearing a cross around his neck, forced to betray his ideals and now to oppose Novosard, his comrade, his childhood friend. Would they one day meet on the battlefield, adversaries in opposing trenches? Would they recognize one another if their paths of war were to cross? Would Novosard become just a cold corpse, one more victim in this fratricidal war? These questions tormented Georgi, awakening in him a profound despair over the brutal ironies of fate. In a conflict so absurd, where alliances and enemies proved as fluid as the borders themselves, the possibility of crossing swords with a longtime friend embodied the ultimate tragedy. Georgi questioned his own capacity to react to such an eventuality. Would he be able to keep his composure, to prioritize the mission over the bonds of the past? Or would the memory of their friendship be powerful enough to break him? The very idea of this confrontation haunted him, weaving a veil of doubt tightly around his heart. He would have to surrender, but how could he do so without risking being shot by a firing squad or killed by mistake? The thought of stripping naked and running toward the Ukrainian lines crossed his mind, but the approaching winter made such a plan suicidal, the bite of the cold just as lethal as enemy bullets or Wagner's. Georgi was well aware that in war, as in life, nothing was certain. Every day brought its share of surprises, often brutal, sometimes miraculous. He had to find a more viable strategy. Perhaps he could use a white flag? These thoughts agitated Georgi's mind, swirling like leaves caught in a sudden squall. Sergei placed a hand on his shoulder, pulling him from his reflections.
I brought you something special. Pieces of psilocybin truffle have been baked into the loaf. A little gift from Alexander. I told the guards it's hazelnuts inside.
He set down slices of bread draped in a cloth. Georgi smiled, giving an approving nod. He wrapped the gift back up and slipped it next to the jar of strawberry jam.
How much did the judge give you, by the way?
15 years. Sergei, visibly shaken and appalled by this news, lowered his eyes to the floor, motionless. He remained for a few moments in a pensive silence. Thanks for visiting me, sir.
I'll come again soon, once I'm settled in Moscow.
Sergei was escorted out of the visitation area. The sound of his footsteps slowly faded away, leaving Georgi alone with the echo of his friend's promise. Georgi closed his eyes, a few minutes of sterile rumination to empty his head, to flay his being. The link to the past would soon have to be severed. He had had enough. His soul could take no more. A man was shown into the room. It was Kirienko. For the first time, he was seeing Georgi's face in the flesh, without any distortion or concealment, outside the mists of his hallucinations. Kirienko recounted why he was there. He had had a dream the night following the incident. He saw, indeed, Georgi's face, framed by a theater of war, a tableau of disasters, frozen, snow-covered corpses, abandoned, bloodied children weeping and wandering slowly along a street lined with ruined houses. In this nightmare, a voice had resounded. It announced that this man, Georgi, would fulfill his mission, but only directly, in Ukraine. It was a divine voice, Kirienko insisted. He explained how he had tracked Georgi down through his contacts in the municipal police. The process had not been complicated. He had then used his connections in the military to ensure Georgi was enlisted into one of Wagner's best battalions, where his primal rage and his skills as a kidnapper would be put to good use, perfectly aligned with the vision revealed in his dream. Kirienko had resigned from his post at the town hall shortly thereafter. The hallucinations that had contributed to this decision continued to haunt him, sometimes protective, sometimes terrifying during certain nights. Georgi stared deeply into Kirienko's eyes. Bearing an almost childlike honesty, the man was smiling. Kirienko was like an innocent child, as if he had just been reborn. Georgi's vision suddenly blurred, his heart accelerated, his breathing grew ragged. He was walking straight into hell, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions. He believed, after all, that he had done a good deed, rectifying what he called corruption by targeting politicians afflicted with a different worldview. But this act, altruistic and selfless in appearance, had led only to further destruction and self-delusion. Georgi had not foreseen this. How could he have foreseen it, a young, idealistic man? People of that ilk, the dreamers, are the first to be swallowed, digested, and spat out by reality. Georgi imagined wiping the foolish smile off Kirienko's face, smashing his head in, crushing it, stomping on it until it was nothing but a reddish pulp. He was screaming like a savage in the theater of his own mind.
Thank you for this visit. Such a gesture, coming from an esteemed patriot like yourself toward an ordinary man, instills a certain humility. If the motherland is in the hands of men of integrity like you, we, the people, can sleep with serenity.
This response is entirely in keeping with the boy who chained and poisoned me in the basement of my own home, just as secretive and arrogant.
Kirienko's words stung the already tense atmosphere. They brought forth deeper bitterness and a primal, inexplicable anger. Kirienko slipped away. Georgi was escorted back to his medical room. That evening marked his last night in Kamchatka. Georgi spread the jam over the slices of bread and devoured them loudly, chewing the truffles. A bitter taste filled his mouth. The day's encounters hardly occupied his thoughts. Nervousness and melancholy were ground down by his empty existential stare. Night had fallen. The black and white colors began to run, dripping slowly down the walls. Georgi was entering another world, deep within himself. He greeted his demons and his inner children. Here he was again, one last time, the final time. Thick shadows, saturated with the smell of anguish and the old wood of his childhood bedroom, came to his mind. It was a temporary oblivion, a pseudo-revelation, a desire to return there, to that simpler time. To flee, in fact. Nothing could be more childish. As the psilocybin tightened its grip, the walls began to pulsate softly, like the pulse of a gigantic, ancient heart. The shadows stretched, twisting into grotesque shapes that whispered amongst themselves with palpable malice. The murmurs grew, buzzing with unspeakable truths and the dark secrets of the universe. Georgi, nailed to the bed under the weight of his blanket, felt his mind withering beneath this rising tide of visions. The stars above the snowy plains transformed into deformed faces. The very air seemed to solidify, weaving silver threads around him that tightened with every panting breath. Reality, that once reliable concept, tore into shreds, giving way to a world where time and space contorted into a suffocating embrace. It was a theater of the absurd, and yet not as absurd as his own reality. Georgi perceived the echoes of a distant battle, the screams of his future comrades blending with the death rattles of the dying, all repeated and distorted as if through a cacophony of broken mirrors. A primal terror awakened within him, a fear not of dying on the front, but of never escaping this mental labyrinth where every thought mutated into a monster. 2 hours slipped by, but the intensity of his hallucinatory delirium did not diminish in the slightest. He buzzed and sweated profusely. The geometric, extraterrestrial, overwhelming shapes disoriented him, whether he closed his eyes or not. It was an overdose, he concluded. From these shapes, an oversized cross emerged, rising through the mists of his tormented mind. Initially perceived as a symbol of redemption, the structure gradually metamorphosed into a horrifying manifestation of terror. The rigidity of its straight lines began to undulate and twist, insidiously transposing into an immense red serpent, so long that it found neither its head nor its tail, and whose skin, brilliant and menacing, shimmered beneath the glares of a distorted dawn. The scales of this creature, like fragments of broken mirrors, reflected tortured faces, the specters of fallen fighters, Ukrainians, Russians, it mattered not. On this serpentine back, Putin was crucified, splayed out in a grotesque parody of the crucifixion. His entire body had been devoured, assimilated by the reptile, leaving only his agonizing head, a bleeding black hole in place of a mouth, from which blood nonetheless streamed, vaporizing into a dark mist in the air before even hitting the ground. His gaze, filled with ineffable terror, fixed upon Georgi, silently begging for rescue or perhaps delivering a dark omen. The air, enriched with blood and the taste of iron, warped, oscillating between the tangible and the unreal, the present and the future. Each monstrous heartbeat of the serpent sent ripples through Georgi's weakened body, as if the very fabric of the world were about to give way. A discordant chant filled the surroundings, a choir of lost souls singing hymns of defeat and desolation, exacerbating the resonance of the upcoming battles in Georgi's mind. Paralyzed by horror as much as by fascination, he understood that this nightmarish vision was a warning of what awaited him in the trenches of war. The specter of the serpent and the fallen president, united in a macabre crucifixion, would permeate every moment of his life to come, painting in black every act of bravery or despair on the front lines. This indelible mark would haunt him from now on, transforming every shadow into a constant reminder of the abyss opening beneath his feet. Georgi woke up filled with awe. He was lucky, and he owed it to himself not to forget it. His initial objective, to gradually reach the summit of corruption, remained unchanged. He would simply reach it by another path. The two men who had accompanied Prigozhin to the penal colony a few weeks earlier finally arrived. Georgi shaved, and in a mere 15 minutes, they drove him to the Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky airport, departing for St. Petersburg, toward Wagner's headquarters. Georgi's training was about to begin. He found himself in the heart of vast, arid steppes serving as firing ranges, where wind and earth blended into a monotonous melody. The harshness of the place was a memorable gray, almost sculpted into the morning cold that bit at his skin through the new uniform. The training program, stretched over an endless week, began invariably at 6 in the morning and dragged on until 10 at night, under the watchful eye of Andrei Tsikulin. Perfectly bald, he sported a yellowed mustache, stained by tobacco smoke. A former member of the Spetsnaz, the special forces of the Russian Federation, his imposing, uncompromising physique, his translucent, pale blue eyes, and his voice that sliced through the air with authority made him a dreaded instructor who forged the recruits relentlessly, without a single break. In the gray dawn, Georgi and his squad, composed of about 15 recruits, awoke to the rigors of military discipline. From the first light of day, the training fields echoed with the rhythmic detonations of Kalashnikovs. These rifles, now natural extensions of their bearers, had to be handled with a quasi-religious respect, as Tsikulin constantly emphasized. The instruction focused heavily on posture. The body had to be stable when shooting and flexible when moving, ready to pivot or drop to one knee without losing balance. Georgi learned that the Kalashnikov was an extension of his arm, an inseparable tool of his person that he must honor, knowing how to strip, assemble, and rapidly clean it of mud and dust, even under enemy fire. Tsikulin walked the ranks of the young recruits, adjusting their stances. When they aimed their Kalashnikov, the shoulders and arms had to form an L, straight, sober, and precise, perfectly aligned with the weapon. Beyond basic techniques, analyzing the source of enemy fire remained essential. Positioning oneself facing the enemy, rather than exposing the flanks where bulletproof vests offered little protection, could represent the thin line between life and death. After a lunch of dry rations and lukewarm water, theoretical sessions took over. In an austere room with bare walls, Tsikulin rolled out maps and diagrams, describing the reality of the war in eastern Ukraine. He broached the subject of the trenches, evoking their heavy silence before the storm of steel, and spoke of drones, those invisible, inaudible specters capable of sowing death without warning. Recently introduced into military strategies for artillery reconnaissance, for purging an area with detachable grenades, or, in the case of kamikaze drones equipped with explosives, for annihilating the enemy by crashing directly into the target, these devices were drastically reconfiguring military know-how. Manufactured locally for around €400, making them incredibly cheap, they could destroy a tank or a bunker full of soldiers. Ordinary infantrymen now had even fewer safe havens. Someone, somewhere on the battlefield, constantly had an eye on them. To back up his points, Tsikulin invited veterans to share their experiences in Ukraine. The stories involving drones captivated every listener.
Our position was being attacked by enemy kamikaze drones. 2 other comrades and I spotted the first one. It was slow, visibly loaded with explosives. We shot it down, but it didn't explode as expected. Nobody touched it or went near it. An hour later, 2 more appeared. The first hit a tree branch and fell without causing damage. The second wounded a soldier who was just delivering food. He was unlucky. 3 drones in an hour. The Ukrainians were hunting us. We had to move, carefully. That faint mosquito noise, you hear it just a fraction of a second before you find yourself crippled. It can make you paranoid, sick in the head. But I was lucky. I was able to come home. Luck is rare ammunition, very precious. Knowing how to identify these sounds can save lives, yours and your comrades. That goes for all sounds, really.
The almost musical rustling of the wind in the tall grass, signaling terrain variations or nearby movement. The subtle crack of a branch, a warning sign of an animal's presence, or worse, an enemy approaching in silence. Hearing, the awareness of one's environment, remains the first step in mastering the battlefield. Small arms emit distinct sounds. Incoming and outgoing fire differ notably depending on the distance. A faint buzzing indicates the bullet is passing overhead, traveling slower than the speed of sound in the air. A loud crack means the distance allows them to aim and hit their target, meaning you, Tsikulin explained. A gradual whistling announces a mortar, becoming more oppressive as the distance to your position shrinks. 1 whistle per minute is intimidation, and 1 per second means an attempt at suppression, especially if enemy lines are close. Mortars remain more frequent in Ukraine than artillery, although the latter is still responsible for 80% of deaths, he added. Identifying the direction, caliber, and distance of the shells, based on their sonic characteristics, amounts to distinguishing the high-pitched whistle of small calibers tearing through the air with lightning speed from the deeper roar of large calibers, whose shrapnel projects against the ground and surrounding structures, ricocheting endlessly. If the distance to the impact site is great, echoes fill the space, reverberating in regular waves. In the absence of an echo, whether lightning-fast or deep, high-pitched or low, the only strategy is to throw yourself flat on your stomach as quickly as possible, covering your ears with your hands to mitigate the impact and concussion. This echolocation, once properly honed, draws a sonic map of the immediate environment, offering an invisible but precise guide in the fogs of war, essential for anticipating where and when death will strike.
The prone position is advantageous in defense because it reduces the exposed surface area of the body, unlike standing up.
Beguiling exhaled the smoke of his umpteenth cigarette.
This posture is crucial even in the event of a sniper attack. Furthermore, it is essential to find cover, to anticipate the terrain, and to analyze the surroundings. If no structure allows for concealment, once again, lie down. Use the irregularities of the terrain as a natural shelter. Nestle yourself in. This is particularly vital against explosives which, upon detonation, project debris mainly upwards. If you drop fast enough, barely 2 meters is enough to save you, especially if you've correctly and timely identified the source of the sound. While moving toward cover, try to make enemy fire less accurate with intimidation fire, called suppressing fire. Once in cover, prolong the suppressing fire. For protection against explosives, soft armor will be issued to be worn under bulletproof vests, mitigating impacts and protecting vital organs. Those who wish to invest further can acquire pelvic armor, which protects critical areas such as the femoral artery and the pelvis, extremely vulnerable and likely to cause severe disability if injured. As for Kevlar helmets, they do not stop bullets. That is a myth. But they offer essential protection against grenade and mortar shrapnel. Your armor, especially the pelvic armor, is the only thing that will save you against kamikaze drones. You heard the veterans. With the speed of these drones, it is impossible to shoot them down or avoid them. We can only reduce the impact. So, if you spot a drone, stay motionless, because their operators rely primarily on movement to spot potential targets. The video transmission quality doesn't allow otherwise. For now. To neutralize these machines, shotguns are effective due to their high spread. Regarding mines, advance in single file, preferably behind an armored vehicle. If it explodes, keep moving, without giving into panic, always straight ahead, and take the least inviting path where no one would plant mines, set up ambushes, or monitor by drone. If you go on a mission, make sure to check with your hierarchy about the possible presence of mines, their type, and their location. Since in Wagner there are neither ranks nor commanders, only positions, consult the most informed comrade, the one who has recently visited the mission zone. Above all, during any movement, avoid throwing trash during the day and smoking at night so as not to be spotted. In groups, limit yourselves to 3 or 4 people to avoid provoking a major enemy reaction. Communicate constantly amongst yourselves. Cohesion is vital. Master your radio and your weaponry, and train whenever possible. Your survival depends on it. Finally, discipline is paramount. If an order is given, execute it without hesitation. From a distance, you don't see the drones, nor the tanks, nor the armor, nor the enemy troops. It's reconnaissance that knows about them, thanks to drone intelligence. As for planes, they primarily target military installations or other strategic points, identified by drone or satellite intelligence. So move away from any possible target if you see an enemy plane, and ensure your camouflage is adequate. If you find yourself in a targeted building, make sure to be on the lower floors, or even better in the basement, because missiles and artillery usually strike the upper levels. More generally, in the event of an artillery attack or any other explosive, scatter immediately to reduce the risks. Last but not least, a tourniquet must always be on you. It is vital to practice first aid, especially if you find yourself pinned down under enemy fire and medical vehicles cannot reach your position. Ultimately, The various means of killing another are the fruit of human genius. Employ that same genius to conquer and not to succumb.
Sikulin's lessons formed a tsunami of information that concluded, without exception, with the exact same phrase.
But do not forget, to survive the war, the first step is to have an enormous amount of luck. To kill, it only takes a few millimeters of bad luck. This rule applies to your enemy and to yourself.
Among the recruits, this way of dispensing lectures was quickly dubbed Sikulin's info machine gun. The evenings, marked by sheer exhaustion, were reserved for night survival exercises. Without night vision goggles, a rare piece of equipment, not produced in Russia and expensive to import, the recruits found themselves forced to sharpen their senses to navigate the darkness, to survive in it, despite being at a technical disadvantage. Sikulin always spoke in a sober, sterile manner. He addressed everyone with a friendly, direct "you," without frills. He was there to prepare, to warn, not to console. The content of his speeches smelled of death. It showed in his weary, exhausted posture. He had seen hundreds of comrades fall, through years of service, in Chechnya, Georgia, undoubtedly in Syria. How many among those he trained would never return? What was the point of pushing so hard? The fate of his disciples seemed already sealed, predetermined. Sikulin lit a cigarette and watched the final preparations fall into place. The 7th day of training had arrived. Before him stretched a pit of mud, and behind him stood his recruits, including Georgi.
War does not determine who is right. It determines who stays and who leaves. Today marks the end of your apprenticeship and the beginning of a new life, the one where only God reigns over your fate. Our God is not benevolent. He contaminates the water of the Egyptians. He kills their children. He annihilates entire civilizations. You are going to prove to me right now who you are, the one who stays or the one who leaves.
Sikulin took off his jacket and his undershirt, jumped into the pit, and lit a fresh cigarette.
Nobody enters close combat in modern wars, especially not in Ukraine. But your physical agility and endurance will demonstrate how capable you are of surviving.
He motioned to one of the recruits, a robust young man who had distinguished himself by his resilience during training.
You, here, until first blood.
The young man climbed down into the muddy pit. With each step, the mud slipped, threatening to make him fall, clinging and forming clay along the walls. Sikulin, without uttering another word, adopted a low, alert stance, a posture characteristic of Sistema, the close-quarters combat system of the Spetsnaz. Arms semi-folded and extended at eye level, body leaning slightly forward, knees supple. Georgi immediately recognized the stance. Navasard had mentioned that this close combat concept had been developed to kill with brutal efficiency. Sikulin was not joking. His demeanor, his posture, his expression, everything about him came alive, radiating an intense energy, a desire to fight, to finally let loose. He spat out his cigarette and suddenly lunged forward. With one hand, he feinted a melee attack, destabilizing his opponent. Then, with a swift and precise movement of his other hand, he delivered a palm strike to the nose at a diagonal angle. The impact was so powerful it could shatter the nose, drive the bone fragments into the skull, and cause immediate disability. The young man began to bleed heavily.
Go away, back under your mother's skirt.
His voice betrayed an intense rage. The thrill of violence could clearly be read in his shining eyes.
You, here!
He was pointing right at Georgi. A light drizzle started falling, Georgi noticed. He stepped forward, feeling time slow down with each of his steps. Adrenaline surged through him. He remembered his sparring sessions with Navasard. Taking down his opponent, a veteran, was a matter of sheer arrogance. How far would Georgi push his limits to neutralize him? Sikulin's yellowed mustache betrayed long-term heavy tobacco use. Were his lungs weakened enough to falter in endurance? It was time to find out. Georgi took off his jacket, tied his undershirt around his arm, and slid into the mud. Arms folded at elbow height to protect his face and throat, standing upright, knees slightly bent, he faced Tsikulin. Tsikulin attacked, trying to surprise him. A first punch, Georgi blocked it, buffered by the wrapped shirt. A second, he dodged by stepping back. They remained face to face for a moment in defensive postures, breathing heavily, each exhalation forming wisps of vapor in the cool air. Georgi suddenly advanced, took an uppercut, then dodged right and struck with all his might at the solar plexus. Winded, Tsikulin staggered. Seizing the opportunity like a ballet dancer, Georgi leaped behind him and delivered a low kick behind the knee. Tsikulin dropped to a kneel under the impact, and in that instant, Georgi unwrapped the shirt from his arm and twisted it tightly around Tsikulin's neck. Strained to the extreme in the effort to dominate a Spetsnaz veteran, his mentor, Georgi wrapped his legs around Tsikulin's body, seeking to immobilize him firmly, to master him in a decisive chokehold. Tsikulin retaliated with repeated elbow strikes to his opponent's kidneys. The two men, crimson from the effort, struggled to breathe, panting, grunting heavily, saliva escaping abundantly from their fouled, obscene mouths. They thrashed relentlessly, like snakes bogged down in thick mud. It was a decisive moment, a test of strength, of endurance, of sheer will, which would determine which of the two, master or pupil, would gain the upper hand. Georgi, in a sudden move, released his grip, propelled himself forward, and planted a devastating punch squarely on Tsikulin's nose. A sharp crack rang out, followed by a rush of blood. Tsikulin roared, his face contorting in pain. Mud, spit, blood, a cocktail of cruelty, and those eyes. The eyes of predators desiring flesh, desiring to devour it, consume its blood, spit out its bones. Up above, the recruits, standing in a perfect straight line, like a religious procession, watched them with absolute fascination. The boy who had just lost to Tsikulin stood slack-jawed. Georgi backed away, catching his breath, maintaining a defensive posture, anticipating his mentor's reaction. With surprising velocity for a man his age, Tsikulin threw himself at Georgi, struck him with a palm strike on his damp skin, locked his hands around Georgi's waist, and, in a sharp leap, tackled him to the ground, deep into the mud, among the boot prints. Georgi fought back with a flurry of elbow strikes against Tsikulin's back. Tsikulin, straddling Georgi, delivered two brutal headbutts to his nose. On the third, Georgi dodged it, turned his head, and bit down hard on Tsikulin's ear. Like a rabid animal, without releasing his grip, he panted into the crook of the ear, savoring the metallic taste of blood, refusing to unclench his jaw, his bloodshot eyes locked onto his prey. They remained like this for a moment, suspended in time, their bodies intertwined in a tableau of primal combat. Tsikulin, in a brutal gesture, punched Georgi in the liver. Georgi ripped off his opponent's ear. Tsikulin looked at him, a rabid dog who stared right back, the bloody ear still clenched between his teeth, a biting smile playing at the corners of his lips. In one final, desperate effort to regain control, Tsikulin used whatever strength he had left to deliver a final, crushing headbutt straight to Georgi's nose. The impact was enough. Georgi lost consciousness, his heavy body slumping against the muddy earth. As Georgi lay motionless, Tsikulin slowly rose, pain and utter surprise mingling in his gaze. He ran a trembling hand over his face, touching the spot where his ear had been torn away, and stared in disbelief at the blood staining his fingers. The silence that followed flowed heavily, filled only by the buzzing of pain and Tsikulin's ragged breathing, standing alone in the arena. The recruits, witnesses to a ferocious duel, remained entirely speechless, absorbing the brutal lesson of their new reality. Their respect for Tsikulin, a veteran of the legendary Spetsnaz, now mingled with an acute awareness of human fragility, etching this reality deeply into their minds. Tsikulin regained his composure, leaned over Georgi, and ordered the men to lift him up and escort him to the infirmary. In a dreamlike fever, Georgi wandered through the scattered fragments of a now distant past.
When you fight monsters, beware that you do not become a monster yourself.
His friend's face emerged from Georgi's memories, bringing him fleeting comfort, warming his heart. He woke up in the nocturnal darkness, his face covered in bruises, still filthy and foul-smelling. Opposite him, hanging on the wall, the portrait of Vladimir Putin watched him with scrutinizing eyes. Georgi closed his eyes, clenching his fists tight. The presence of this portrait exacerbated a suffocating sense of oppression. He felt an inner resistance awakening. Every muscle in his body revolted against the pain, and that gaze, that implicit surveillance. The air in the room felt asphyxiating, toxic, each breath a reminder of his trials and the struggles yet to come. Georgi refused to yield to the surrounding darkness, to the fragility of his own body and mind.
You were right, sir. No matter how high we rise, we all eventually fall.
The night of solitude and profound introspection, much like what Jesus experienced in the Garden of Gethsemane, led him to absolute abnegation. The entire political system and the officials of his era, corrupt to the marrow, stood against him. A false prophet, a self-proclaimed Messiah, a danger to the established order, to the status quo. The acceptance of his destiny was not an act of resignation, but a conscious choice to sacrifice his life in order to embody an example of integrity according to his philosophy and vision, to create an archetypal precedent. In the solemn calm of this garden, he faced the fear of death and drew the strength to overcome it, not out of pride or defiance, but to transcend his own existence and inspire future generations to remain faithful to their convictions, down to their absolute last ounce of strength. Thus, he made the choice to immortalize himself through this act. Dawn was breaking, dispelling the shadows, chasing away the stars, announcing the imminent arrival of his executioners. Jesus awoke from his final meditation, and Georgi from a wordless prayer.
Пепел ложится на выжженный луг, где стих навсегда лязг железа и стук. Слово застряло в сухом горле комом, и небо затянуто серым изломом. Черная стая кружит над землей, пряча закат за глухой пеленой. Кто запоет, если все будут спать? Смерть — это плата за право дышать. Жизнь — это ветер, что гонит нас в путь, а любовь — это то, что не даст нам уснуть. Стерты клинки о седую траву, тени солдат растворились во рву. Смотрят слепые глаза в небеса, больше не веря ни в сны, ни в слова. Кто-то ушел, ну а кто-то устал, бросив на землю холодный металл. Кто запоет, если все будут спать? Смерть — это плата за право дышать. Жизнь — это ветер, что гонит нас в путь. А любовь — это то, что не даст нам уснуть. А любовь